We have Michael Taggart, and he's going to be giving a talk entitled Using ZAP to the Max, Adding Tai Chi to Your Fitness Routine. So take it away, Michael.
All right. Hello, PancakesCon. My name is Michael Taggart, although most people just drop the Michael and just call me Taggart. That's just fine. And I am super excited to be here. I need to shout out, first of all, Leslie for putting this together and also for sending me to Hope a bunch of years ago and actually kickstarting the InfoSec portion of my IT career. So thank you, Leslie. Before I was a cybersecurity analyst, which is what my current job is, I was a K-12 educator and technologist. And I still do teach about InfoSec on Twitch, which is kind of how I got into all of this. But my day job is a cybersecurity analyst. I'm a blue teamer by job description, but I do use my background as a web developer in doing web app pen testing, which is largely what we're going to be talking about today. I am also a writer. As I said, I'm a streamer and a martial artist for more than half my life, which is going to factor into the second half of today's talk. Basically, I'm an all-around dork, and if you're interested in checking out any of this stuff, you can follow me on Twitch and on Twitter at MTTaggart. Now, we're going to talk about OWASP's web proxy tool called Z-Attack Proxy, ZA Proxy, or just ZAP. Now, I want to make sure that this is clear, that this is not going to be like an intro to web app pen testing talk. We are making some assumptions about experience with HTML, HTTP requests and responses, and having seen how some of these tools work. Now, if you don't have that, there's still something you can get out of this, but we are going to make some of those assumptions for the primary audience of this talk. Now, ZAP is a free and open source web proxy. It actually comes installed by default in Kali Linux when you set that up. And it's an alternative to the pretty well-known Burp Suite, which is a fantastic piece of software. But Burp's really advanced features are paid and ZAP's are not. I've been using ZAP for a long time now, and I've come to actually prefer it over Burp. It has a lot of powerful automation, reporting, and scripting capabilities. But in order to make ZAP work the best for you, it does take some customization and some tweaking. And we're going to go over some of the things that I do to successfully use ZAP in a professional capacity every day. Without further ado, then, let's get zapping. All right, so I'm going to start over here in my Kali Linux install. You can see I am in ZAP right now. And today we're going to be testing the OWASP Juice Shop web application. We're going to be trying to find some vulnerabilities in this. But before we even get to ZAP, I want to talk about a good setup for web app pen testing in the way that I do it. Now, generally speaking, you want to have a browser that is proxied to your web proxy so that anything that you navigate to shows up in the proxy. I use Brave for my proxying and my web app pen testing, and also pretty much for everything else in my browser life. The reason I use Brave is that it's Chromium based, so I still have the cool Chrome inspector stuff, but it makes less noise outbound than does Chrome. And so it reduces what I have to clean up in order to work with a web proxy. In addition to using Brave, there are two must-have extensions that I use when I set up my pen testing profile in Brave, and I do separate that from the rest of my traffic. The first one is Proxy Switchy Omega. The name rules, so obviously that's one reason. But it's an extension that allows me to configure my browser and not my entire system to send traffic through my local proxy. Foxy Proxy works great too. That's available for Chrome as well. But before I knew that, I started using this one and got really comfortable with it, and it works phenomenally. So just look for Switchy Omega in the Chrome Web Store. The other one that I like to have, just so I have this information at the ready, is Wappalyzer, which is going to use the responses and the information coming from web content to detect technologies that are in use in a web app. Super handy to have just for some recon, so I know what I'm dealing with, whether it's a PHP application, if it's an IIS server versus an Nginx server or whatever. Great to just have that at a glance. So as I said, we're going to be testing the Juice Shop, and you can see here that I've got my two extensions. There's my Switchy Omega setup, and here is Wappalyzer. Now, Wappalyzer tells me that this is an Angular JS application, and as we'll see in a minute, modern web applications provide some complications for traditional web proxy testing, but nothing that we can't get around. But before we even do anything in terms of testing, we want to configure ZAP to the best of our ability. So we're going to go through some customizations that I think really work out great. The first thing that we want to do is set up any of the additional plugins that we can add on to ZAP to make it even more powerful than it is out of the box. ZAP has a really active and vibrant add-on marketplace, which you can access through this multicolored button right here. And some of the must-have plugins that I use are the community scripts, which are additional script-based extensions that the community has added, things like bug hunting scripts. There are even scripts for specific vulnerabilities. So if you want to test for like Telerik vulnerabilities or whatever else, that's going to be in there for you. Lots of great material in there for you to check out. In order to run community scripts, you're going to need the custom payloads plugin. So that comes with the dinner, basically, when you install community scripts. And in addition, the Python scripting plugin will come with that as well. And I love the Python scripting plugin. Even though ZAP is written in Java, it has the ability for you to add extensions to it using a Python-based API. That's pretty advanced stuff, but there are situations in which you want to do some custom things with headers. And the Python scripting module makes that really, really, really easy. I also have the FuzzDB lists installed, and that's just for quick access to easy testing payloads for fuzzing at a target. You know, sending many different variations of an SQL injection attack or a cross-site scripting payload. These are going to be in here for that. It also has word lists for names and usernames and even some passwords. And then lastly, just because it's super topical, the OST support for out-of-band testing, where you need to trigger a response to a third-party server, is available now. And that is particularly useful when you're testing for Log4j. And so, in fact, if you install the Log4j testing component in ZAP now, it requires you to use OST support. With our plugins out of the way, there are some creature comforts that we want to set up in just the global config of ZAP, because out of the box, there are some things that might not make sense for us. The first thing I want to call attention to is that every time a request comes in to ZAP, you can see that I've got this history down here, and it's going to be showing me the request and the response in this field. And it's going to try to render the body of the message. But sometimes the body is gigantic. So we're going to start by going into our global options in the gear icon here, and we're going to go to our display section. I have the ability to set up the minimum size that is the cutoff for the automatic rendering of messages. And I like to set that pretty low to like 100,000 bytes, because if I need to look at something, I can enable that rendering, but by default, turning it off for really big messages really speeds ZAP up. It is a single-threaded application, so you want to be careful about how much you're making it do with messages that it's ingesting. So I like to knock that down to around 100,000 bytes. You can play with whatever size works for you for whatever target you're working with. Global alert filters, also super important. Now, I don't have any set up here because we wanted to add one live, but as you can see, we have some alerts coming in from ZAP. If I look at alerts here, I'm getting alerts on content security policy, cross-domain JavaScript, things like that. But ZAP is applying a severity to them that I may not agree with, or my organization may not agree with. So for my report, I want to make sure that any of my decision-making is reflected in my alert severities. To do that, I'm going to click Add, and my personal favorite is the clickjacking. The clickjacking vulnerability, which now I can't find. Oh, there we go, anti-clickjacking header. In an internal test, it's by medium by default, but in an internal test, the anti-clickjacking header may not be as severe. It's something to make note of, but may not be as concerning a risk. So I can choose the anti-clickjacking header alert type and change the new risk level to low rather than to medium. I can confirm that. And then anytime that shows up in my alerts, this filter will be applied. Now, this is also global across the board, not just for this target. Similarly, the global exclude URLs, you want to use some regular expressions to set up anything that your browser is going to make noise with. So as you can see, I have a regular expression here that's just knocking off everything going to brave.com. I'm just excluding that from the proxy right out the gate. I don't have to worry about it. It's not going to show up in my sites tree here. If you have an alert that you absolutely want to silence, you know that you don't want it, you can go to passive scan rules and shut it off. So here I've turned off the timestamp disclosure alert because it's not helpful to me. Yes, things are going to have timestamps or things that look like timestamps, but I don't really care about that. So I've turned that off. I don't want to fill my report with garbage. Lastly, in customization, and I know that we're going very, very quick on this, but I wanted to make sure that we got to the actual testing here. Lastly, ZAP has built-in spidering and attack modes. You can just tell it to attack a target, but that's a bad idea. You don't want to send any of these automated tools blindly at a target. You want to be considerate about what you send it at. And I prefer generally to fuzz something to attacking. And when I attack a target, I'm not doing the entire site at once. I'm picking my endpoint to send my payloads to. To make that a little bit easier for me, I'm going to make custom attack policies that only do one kind of attack at a time. So if I go to my scan policy manager, which is this little EQ mixing button up here, it's also available in Analyze and Scan Policy Manager. You can see that I have a couple of policies already made, one for SQL injection, one for cross-site scripting. And if I wanted to make a new one, what I would do is I would click that add, name my new policy, and change up my thresholds, which is the threshold at which it is going to alert on something. And if I set it to off, it won't run the attack. So if I apply off to all, everything is turned off. And then I can pick whatever specific attacks I want to run against a target. So if I did want to run something like server-side inclusion or server-side code injection, I can set that to threshold for medium for alerting. And then if I really wanted to be aggressive with my attack, I can use high on both of these to use more of the payloads in the payload database. All right, that's it for customization. Now we're going to get ready to actually attack something. So we're going after Juice Shop here, and you can see that I've logged in here. If I reload the page, I will get new data in my history. You can kind of see I've got a local timestamp that is close to what we're doing here. All good. But in order for me to really work with this target, I have to add it to a scope. So to do that, I'm going to right-click on the site and include in context and make a new context for this thing. I will name it Juice Shop. And I will give it some information about what technologies it's using. We don't know what database it's using, but probably not Oracle. So in this particular case, I'm going to go for MySQL, Postgres, SQLite. And I'm going to uncheck the rest of this stuff because this changes up the kinds of attacks that ZAP will run. I'm going to re-enable the JavaScript language. Obviously, this thing is written in Java. So JavaScript, I should say. And so that's a good baseline for an app like this, a modern web application. Now, one thing that we have to do, this is an authenticated test. I have an account on this site. One thing that a lot of testers do is they will elide setting up authentication with an authenticated site because it's hard. But I'm going to show you how to do it the right way, even for modern web applications like this. So we're going to close out of the context here for a second, and we're going to go log in to our application. So I'm going to go log in. I've already created an account to save some time. bob@bob.com. I can't be the only one who uses that as a test email address. Super secure password, and I'm logged in. Now, that login did send a server, an HTTP request to the server. You can see in REST user, now there's a post request that has my data in it. And be aware of that, your password is going to show up, right? Now that I have that, I can go back into my context by double-clicking, going to authentication, and setting this up the right way. to tell ZAP how to detect whether it is authenticated. And it's going to try to do that whenever it does any spidering or any attacking, because it wants to make sure that it's authenticated. So I'm going to go ahead and choose JSON-based authentication. Yes, it's a login form, but the data sent is JSON in nature. So we choose that. I have to point this thing to the login form, or the login post request, really. So I'm going to send it to REST user, and then there's that post request right there after I clicked on select. Now that I have this data loaded, I can choose my parameters. Email looks good for username, and password is password. Awesome. From there, I move down to users, and I'm going to add username, say Bob, set the right username to the email, and the right password. Okay, now the context knows how to authenticate, but can it detect whether we are authenticated? The way to know that is by checking HTTP sessions. And let's remove this and see if it can. So we're going to reload the page and see if it picks up the session. Okay, it does. Phenomenal. The reason it's doing that is because in our config, our global config for HTTP sessions, you'll see that one of the options is for looking for tokens. Now, if you're not picking up HTTP sessions, one of the things you want to check for is whether the specific cookie that your application is using for tracking your session, if that key value is available to you. And if it isn't, go ahead and add it. So just for sanity, I'm going to add token in here. And that guarantees that the HTTP session is getting tracked. And that's what it will update when it needs to re-authenticate to a site. All right, now let's run some stuff against it. When we want to do some passive scanning, we have two options here. The first one is going to be a spider, which is a traditional spider, where you look at the response from the web server and follow any links that the HTML shows you. But we have a problem with a modern web application with a traditional spider. It'll still do some stuff, but look how small this is. It's very, very short. And that's because most of the content of this app is being rendered in the browser by the JavaScript. So a lot of the content isn't going to be accessible to ZAP in this form. So we can run this passive spider. We'll choose our context, use shop, and user. That's awesome. But in addition, we're also going to want to run the Ajax spider, which is going to use a headless version of a web browser like Firefox to actually render that JavaScript and use that content, that document, to follow any links that it finds. So I'm going to, again, choose Juice Shop and the user Bob and allow that to run. And already, just by doing passive scanning, if we go back to the Juice Shop application, we should see some awards getting cleared. If we go to scoreboard, at least, we should see some getting cleared. Yep. Sure enough, we have 3 already cleared here. Now, any good test is a mix of automated and manual testing. So I always want to make sure I'm taking a look at what's going on inside of the browser history and the ZAP history to see what is possible here. And this is where modern web applications can get a little tricky with ZAP, and you do have to still be a manual. We're not going to get replaced anytime soon by automated testing, and here's one reason why. So one really quick vulnerability to find here in Juice Shop is the search. If I search for test here, you can kind of see that there's a reflection between what I put in the URL and what shows up here. The problem is, you see how this comes after this hashtag, this £? AngularJS is handling the routing for the application. The server is not. So all of this is actually happening in the browser, and no additional requests are heading back to the web server. So ZAP can't find this vulnerability for me. I have to find it. So if I want to give it a shot, I can go ahead and use an image test. And sure enough, there is reflected cross-site scripting on this site, but ZAP wasn't going to be able to find it. You, the web app pen tester, have to. But something that ZAP could find, if we're being careful about what we see, is this additional, maybe deprecated request back to search and queue equals. Now, this suggests to me that maybe there's another API endpoint that does some searching, and I definitely want to test this out. So the first thing I'm going to do is that I can see that I got a 304 not modified here, which means I got a redirect maybe, but I want to see if it actually works if I send data to this get parameter of queue. To do that, I'm going to right click on that option or that request and open and resend with the request editor. This is like repeater in Burp. And I'm going to set test and go over to the response tab and hit send. I got a 200 and I got data. That rules. Okay, now that I've done that, what I want to do, now that I've got something that looks like this, my next instinct is definitely SQL injection, just to see if I can test for it, right? Because I got data back in some form. So to do that really easily, as I said, I want to run attacks intelligently. I now have a specific target to run an attack against. So what I'll do is I'll take that new request. I know it's kind of down at the bottom in the overlay, but I want to take that test right here. I want to right click on this in the history and go to attack and active scan, which is our active attack. So I'm targeting that endpoint. I'm going to use the SQL injection policy that I've made that just does that. It doesn't throw the kitchen sink at it, just the SQL injection attacks. I'll use my correct user and go to work. And let's take a look at our alerts tab as that happens. Right away, I get SQL injection vulnerabilities detected. Super, super handy. And then the last piece I want to show, and then we'll kind of pivot. I know this was fast, but it's recorded, so you can go back and look at it again, is how to use fuzzing, because fuzzing and attacking work hand in hand. And generally speaking, I want to be doing more fuzzing than actually attacking. So another thing that I saw when I logged in was a basket. So here's a request to rest/basket/6. That 6 sets off all sorts of alarms for me as a web app pen tester, because I want to know, okay, so I got data back from it. Can I access other baskets? Easy enough to test. What I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight the location that I want to fuzz in this content. Right click on it and choose fuzz. This opens up the fuzz dialog, again, very much like Burp Intruder. And I have a position already set up. I'm going to go to payloads, add, and numbers. From here, I'm going to set up my range. Let's do just 1 to 20. Add that payload and start the fuzzer. The fuzzer is going to run really, really quickly and give me data about what came back. Again, very similar to Burp. And you can see that if I'm sorting by response body, which I am, I definitely got access to other people's shopping baskets. I got data back from those requests. So already definitely getting some great findings back just by setting up ZAP to work the way that I want it to. I know that was fast, but as I said, this is recorded and I'm trying to make time for questions at the end. All right, with that, we're going to pivot and also calm down a little bit to talk about Taiji Chuan, also known as Tai Chi. I have been a martial arts practitioner, and specifically a practitioner of traditional Chinese martial arts, for more than half my life, and I love them. I really, really believe in their benefits for people. Taiji is a traditional Chinese martial art, and the legend says that it was the movements were based on a fight between a snake and a crane. But the reality is that it was designed as a physical practice and a martial practice for Taoist monks to provide spiritual as well as physical benefits. It is generally practiced slowly. That's what most people see, like in the park, right? But not always. And I was taught Tai Chi as a martial art. And some styles definitely do have quick movements interspersed with slower movements. It can be very, very powerful when you understand how to use it as that. But even if you don't want to do that, it is a fantastic exercise. It emphasizes mindfulness, control, and balance. And I have to say that when I really get into the groove when I'm practicing Tai Chi, the rest of the world does just melt away. It feels fantastic. Now, these days, it's a lot easier to find people who teach yoga than it is to teach Tai Chi. And they do have similar benefits, but there are some important differences. Tai Chi is not stationary. So if you do some of the traditional forms, the sequences of movements, you're going to need some space. But the form that we've put together for you today, actually you can do just behind your chair at your desk. As long as you have enough room to sort of expand your arms out to either side, you're going to be able to do this Tai Chi form. Tai Chi is both martial and spiritual. Yoga is not so martial unless you really read into some of the stuff in the Bhagavad Gita. But Tai Chi absolutely does have martial applications if you're interested in finding that meaning in there. Tai Chi puts a lot more load on the lower body than it does on the upper body. Now, in yoga, obviously, sometimes you're supporting your body weight with your arms. That's really not true in Tai Chi. Your hands are upright. Now, you still have to hold your arms out for long periods of time. And in later forms, you can use weapons, which are heavy, so you can get some upper body going there. But that is a physical difference. And as I said, it's a little bit harder to find teachers and classes, but I will say that with a little bit of practice, you can definitely get started with Tai Chi by just learning from some things online. I really do believe you can get started that way. Okay, super embarrassingly, here is me doing the Yang style 24-step form, just as an example here. So the principles of Taiji Twin, and that Taiji, I should say, means supreme ultimate, and that icon we saw on the last slide refers to the supreme ultimate. It's not a brag. It refers to the unification of yin and yang, which is what the practice is supposed to embody. Our body is relaxed, but it is not limp. Our muscles are engaged, but only when they need to be. We're focused on skeletal alignment and making sure that movement begins from the hips or the core of the body. And in addition, that no one body part moves by itself. Everything is coordinated. There is also the principle of balance, meaning that for everything that goes up, something goes down. And you can see that here as one thing moves forward, one thing moves back, one thing goes up, one thing goes down. And again, the entire body moves at one time. It takes a lot of practice. And even though it seems like there's no effort going on, I have to tell you that your heart rate's going to go up when you do this because your quads in particular are always engaged. All right, so I want to go through a simple 8-step form with you that you can practice and learn some of the basic movements of Tai Chi yourself. So we're going to cut over to a video here that we're going to walk through a couple of times. Okay, so we're going to start our form standing with our feet together, and feel free to do this behind your chair if you have the space along with us. So go ahead and put your feet together, hands at your sides, shoulders relaxed, body up straight. We begin by bending our knees slightly and stepping out to the left. This is the opening of the form. Then, once we have stepped out, we're going to raise our hands to shoulder height and then slightly sink our weight down as our hands drop towards our hips. Move number 2 is called parting the wild horse's mane. And what we're going to do is we're going to do 3 different movements and then alternate sides so we get balance, right? We're doing it on the left, then we'll do it on the right for each of the 3 movements. So the first movement is parting the wild horse's mane. We shift our weight over to our left leg. And what you'll see happen is my right hand comes across my body and comes up to my left shoulder. My left hand at the same time comes over to my right hip, and there's an alignment between elbow and finger. I'm like holding a beach ball, and I'm also trying to create a circle or maybe like a yin-yang sort of symbol, which is intentional. My left foot comes into my right, and then I step out with my heel, and then I shift my weight to my left leg as I turn my body. And I know this takes some practice. I'm going to share the link to this video at the end in the Slack. As I shift my weight over, my hands travel past each other almost like they're crashing cymbals. And they end with my left hand out in front of me, kind of like I'm looking at my phone without reading glasses or something. directly in front of my chest, and my right hand is out to the side with my fingers pointing out to the right. This stance, which is going to be our ending stance for each movement, is known as the bow and arrow stance, or the bow stance. Here's our bow, here's our arrow. Notice that nothing is really locked out. Everything is curved, right? Where you use arches, just like in architecture. 60% of my weight is on my front leg and 40% is on my back. Notice that my toe is turned in here. That happened when I shifted my weight. And my front foot is out like so. There's an alignment between my knee and my toe. It shouldn't go over and it shouldn't be behind, just like this. From here, I'm going to shift my weight over to my right leg to allow my left foot to turn. And I bring my right foot into my left and create that beach ball again. Again, that alignment. I step out to the right, same way, and I part the wild horse's mane on the right. Again, notice that the toe is kind of the left toe is pointed out at a 45-degree angle, and my right foot is out here. I also wanted to note that you have to have this really nice alignment here, from heel to heel. If my heel is in line with my toe, that's no good, because then I'm going to be a little bit too tight roped and I won't have good balance. So I want to make sure that I have a little bit of separation between my toe and my back toe and my front heel. From there, I'm going to wipe my right hand across my face as my left hand comes up. I look back at my left hand as I'm shifting my weight over to the left. Then I wipe the other way as I bring my weight back over to the right. Bring the feet together again. Notice that my right hand is kind of coming up and it curves. As I step out this time, I'm stepping out the same way, but this time my hand comes through. We like to think of it like a crashing wave. That's brush knee twist step. My left hand is down at my side, palm facing down. So again, I wipe again, bring the feet in, step out, brush knee, twist step. Our last movement is called single whip, and we begin by wiping across again as we shift our weight and move our hands back. Now, this time you can see something kind of interesting is going on with my right hand. This is a crane's beak. So I'm taking all of my fingers and putting them on the thumb and hooking my wrist. This is where the crane inspiration really comes from, or it shows itself. As I step out this time, my left hand wipes across my body and then comes out in front, just like so. This is single whip. And again, notice that I'm in my bow stance. To transition to the final single whip, both of my hands drop, then my right hand comes across, my left hand comes up. I shift my weight back over to the leg I stepped out with, which is the way we do this every time. Hook with my left hand, step out, right hand out. And we've got that nice L position between the arms. Finally, we move our weight back to center, turning our toe in toward our initial starting position, and our hands sink down as we stand up, and then we pull our left foot in, reversing the opening. I think we have time to show this one more time. So let's go ahead and do that. So again, we step out, open, we bring our hands up, and we slowly sink down. We shift our weight over to the left and bring the right hand over, pull the left foot in, step out, parting the wild horse's mane. Again, nice and relaxed. We shift our weight back and pull the right leg in. That was to turn this toe, and we step out to part the wild horse's mane on the right side. Then we wipe across our face with both hands, and then we step out to the left, brush knee twist step, our right hand like a crashing wave. Then we wipe the other way, again, pulling that leg we just stepped out with in, and stepping out, brush knee twist step. And then finally, our hand comes out. Notice that it's wiping this way rather than this way. The left, back over to the right, and then we hook our right hand, stepping out, single whip. Both hands drop. We wipe to the right, come over to the left and hook, step out to the right, single whip. Then we close. So as I said, I'm going to share the video, this video and a link to another YouTuber that I actually think does a great job doing Tai Chi demonstrations if you want to learn more in the Slack after this talk. We can go through it again, or if there are any questions, we're at a good stopping point.
Hey, actually, we do have some great questions both on ZAP and some Tai Chi. I was looking at your very end there, and I was thinking, watch me small whip. No, watch me nay nay. No, terrible, terrible joke. So yeah, let's see. Someone did have a question that whenever they use ZAP or Burp, I just go for their bundled browsers, which already have a proxy configured. Is that good enough?
So there's a reason I don't do that, which is that even their bundled browsers are still phoning home to Mozilla all the time, which is why I don't like using them. I have more control if I do it by setting up Brave to work this way. Now, it totally works fine. You can absolutely do that. You can launch, because what ZAP can do is launch, open URL and browser. It can launch it in a controlled browser, whatever target you have. But as I said, it has a lot of overhead. And I find that because it's running as a child process, I don't know, it's less performant than using the browser independently.
Very cool. And someone noticed that you turned off Brave alerts. Why did you do that?
I turned off Brave alerts. I think they mean the global exclude URL here. So the reason I did that is because Brave has a syncing component and a few other things. It doesn't phone home not at all. It just phones home less than Firefox and Chrome vanilla, right? So I still want to quiet all of that. So I have excluded Brave domains, Google APIs, and gstatic.com from my proxy, because otherwise they're going to keep popping up in my sites that the proxy is detecting.
Got you. Also, a question for the ZAP part of the talk. Can I script ZAP usage from the command line, like from Bash?
You sure can. Kind of from Bash. So the automation features are really rich. There is a Python-based API. There's also a Java-based API. But in addition to that, it has recently been added this automation feature, which allows you to set up an automation plan for the kinds of attacks you want to run. You can build it out in ZAP and then save it as a YAML file so that you can import it or modify it however you want. I have done web app tests against like entire cPanel sites, like hundreds of sites, and I have scripted that all from the command line using the Python API.
Very, very cool. Someone was remarking how they were having a tough time of finding a place to learn Tai Chi. They were using DVD and some YouTube videos, but they always seem to be getting the forms wrong. I think you said in either your slides or there was something, you have some recommended resources that do a very good job of showing Tai Chi forms.
Yes, I do. And I'll share those in Slack.
Fantastic. And then can I request the editor, wait, let me read this right. Can I set the request editor window to show request and response at the same time instead of having to switch between tabs?
Yes, you can. If we open the resend request editor, I have a bunch of different view modes here where it says here, separate tabs for request and response. That's the way that I like it, but I can also set it to request shown above response. And now you can see request and response in one window without switching.
That's dope. And then it looks like Johnny from the chat also has a last minute question here. So we can also set up those global filters for the bundled browsers?
Yes, you can. The global alert filters are going to, and don't forget that they're persistent across sessions. It's not just for your specific session, but those global alert filters are going to change for anything that you set up, anything that comes into the proxy. So regardless of what browser the traffic is coming from, including if you do it with curl and the command line with the proxy, those alerts will still go through. And I'll quickly say that one of the things I love to do when I'm doing API testing is I'll load up the API spec in Postman, right, or some other API specific testing tool, proxy it through ZAP, capture the traffic and the authentication keys and things like that, and then use ZAP to do the fuzzing on the actual endpoints. So, and even there, the alert filters will apply.
Very cool. How long have you been doing Tai Chi, by the way?
Oh my God. So yeah, 18 years.
Wow. Well,
yeah.
Have you gone through like many schools of Tai Chi, like different actual schools and teachers and traditions of it, or have you stuck with just one?
Mostly one teacher, but yeah, there were a couple, and then kind of learning on my own after that. And I've done Yang and Sun styles of Tai Chi. I did a little bit of Chen, and then the rest of my traditional martial arts experience is also Chinese martial arts, but um, other internal arts like Xingyi, Bagua, and then also Northern martial arts like Baji Twin.
I got you. Yeah, I have Chen's book over on my bookcase.
Nice.
I've done very cursory. I've only done like the first maybe 18 of the short form in that over there. So opened up almost exactly the same that you did it, and then you are just doing a few different moves differently at the beginning. Same moves that you do later on in the short form that I learned, but you were doing less. It was really cool because I was like, oh yeah, I remember doing that.
Sen style is the oldest of the Tai Chi
Yes.
styles, and Yang is the newest. But and kind of like most regulated. But it's the one that most people will have access to.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, everyone's raving about you in chat. This was fantastic. Everyone's giving you applause and everything else. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom on ZAP and opening our eyes to Tai Chi and martial arts there. So thank you so much for stopping by.